Aristotle predicted exactly how societies collapse, and it all starts with the wealth gap. He said that when the distance between the rich and the poor grows so extreme that the middle class will cease to exist, and from it, a two-faction system will take the place of society. The rich will use their wealth to buy power and rewrite the laws, and they'll lose touch with reality. Meanwhile, the poor will be desperate and hopeless, willing to vote for anyone who promises to burn it all down. He claimed that the middle class is the glue that's holding everything together. Remove it, and society goes with it. Aristotle warned that extreme inequality destroys all trust, cooperation, and any shared purpose. And his solution was simple: a strong middle class, one with enough stability but not too much that they forget what the struggle feels like. Look around today, the wealth gap is wider than ever before. The middle class is disappearing, and as a consequence of this, we're angrier and more divided than ever.
Every superpower reaches a moment when the illusion of total control begins to crack, and the mechanisms that once functioned with effortless precision start to grind under the weight of their own success. We are living through a period where the traditional foundations of authority are shifting beneath our feet, and those who fail to recognize these historical patterns are the ones who will be caught most unprepared when the final shocks arrive. This is not about speculation or sensationalism, but about understanding a documented 7-stage sequence that has dismantled empires from Rome to Britain and is currently manifesting right before our eyes. If you want to understand how to navigate the coming reorganization and ensure your own stability while the global systems fluctuate, you must stay with me until the very end, because the window for preparation is closing faster than most people realize. Before we dive into the meat of this discussion, I need you to do a few things if you value this kind of raw and direct insight. Go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who needs a wake-up call, and make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Also, click that notification bell and select all so you can get every single video the moment we release it, because in this fast-moving environment, missing one update could mean missing the key to your financial survival. We are committed to bringing you the truth, and your support helps us keep the angry guy content coming loud and clear. Now, let us talk about your actual security, because relying on the crumbling systems of the past is a recipe for disaster. You need to check out Angry's Crypto Academy immediately to learn exactly how to protect and safeguard your assets while others are losing theirs to inflation and institutional failure. We will show you how to grow your wealth by teaching you the high-level skills of how to buy, sell, and trade crypto with confidence and precision. The Academy is linked right there in the description of this video, so do not wait for the next stage of the breakdown to hit your bank account. Go check it out now and get your house in order. And if you are out there enjoying these Angry Guy videos and you appreciate the intensity and the fact that I do not pull any punches, you can show some love by buying me a Red Bull. There is a link in the description for that as well, and it helps keep the energy high and the truth coming your way. I appreciate every single one of you who supports the mission. Now, let us get back to the reality of the situation, because history does not care about your feelings or your political affiliations. Every superpower reaches a threshold where expansion stops being a source of strength and starts becoming a massive liability that consumes more resources than it produces. At the beginning of an empire, expansion is praised because it brings in new wealth and new influence, but eventually the costs of maintaining that global reach start to compound until the system is just working to stay in place. We see this today with military commitments that span the globe and administrative bureaucracies that have become so heavy and so slow that they are effectively paralyzed by their own weight. This is the first quiet warning sign that the era of effortless power is coming to an end and that the system is entering a phase of survival rather than growth. Stage 2 is where things get even more dangerous, because this is where the leaders start using financial engineering to hide the fact that the real productive engine is stalling out. When you cannot pay for your expansion with actual output, you start turning to debt and credit and monetary intervention to keep the lights on. And for a while, it actually works and people feel rich on paper. But this creates a specific kind of fragility where the system can handle normal days, but it absolutely cannot tolerate a single major shock without requiring a massive and destructive intervention. We have reached a point where the future is being sacrificed to stabilize the present. And every time there is a crisis, the response is just to print more and borrow more, which only locks us deeper into a momentum that we cannot easily reverse. Then we hit stage 3, which is the explosion of complexity that overwhelms any real coordination or accountability. Rules and regulations multiply until no single human being actually understands how the entire machine works. And decision making slows down to a crawl because everyone is more worried about following the process than achieving a result. In this stage, control is not being exercised. It is being simulated through metrics and reports that look good in a boardroom, but have nothing to do with what is actually happening on the ground. This complexity becomes a defensive wall that protects the status quo from any meaningful reform because the elites are terrified that if they change one small piece, the whole brittle structure might come crashing down. Stage 4 is when the rot moves inward and the social cohesion of the nation begins to fracture because the average person realizes that the system is no longer working in their interest. Trust in institutions evaporates, and the shared narrative that once held the country together breaks apart into bitter polarization and mutual suspicion. People stop investing their emotional energy into the collective success of the nation and start focusing purely on their own survival and their own small circles, which makes the cost of maintaining order skyrocket. When compliance is no longer voluntary and has to be enforced through pressure and management, that the internal foundations of the superpower are already compromised, even if the external military looks as strong as ever. We are currently sitting in stage 5, which is the moment when international credibility begins to fracture and the rest of the world starts hedging their bets against the dominant power. Allies start looking for alternatives, and rivals start testing boundaries because they can see the internal strain and the financial fragility that the leaders are trying to hide. The reserve currency is not collapsing overnight, but it is being diluted as other nations diversify their reserves and start settling trade in different systems to avoid being caught in the fallout. This is the stage of conditional influence where power still exists, but it is no longer automatic. And every bit of global authority has to be bought or forced at a higher and higher cost. Stage 6 is the final warning because this is where the system stops being able to absorb shocks, and every attempt to fix a problem actually makes the structure more rigid and more vulnerable. We see emergency measures becoming permanent and the centralization of power intensifying because the leaders are desperate to react faster to a world that is moving beyond their control. This is the phase where the system starts consuming itself to stay alive, and future capacity is hollowed out just to prevent a collapse today, which only ensures that when the collapse does happen, it will be total. Brittle systems do not fail gradually, they fail suddenly. And once you're in stage 6, the margin for error has effectively vanished and the sequence begins to compress. Finally, stage 7 is the sudden and irreversible loss of control where confidence breaks and events move faster than any institution can respond. This is not the beginning of the story, but the release point of all the pressures that have been building up through the previous stages, and it is usually triggered by something that would have been a minor issue years ago. When the illusion of permanence shatters and the structures that took generations to build lose their relevance in a matter of months, everyone is forced to adapt in real time to a world where the old rules no longer apply. This is the moment of reorganization where power redistributes and the old center no longer anchors the global order, and those who were waiting for certainty find themselves left behind. The reality of a superpower in decline is that the people living within it are often the last ones to admit that the engine is failing because the psychological cost of facing the truth is simply too high for the average mind to bear. We have been conditioned to believe in the concept of exceptionalism as if the laws of history and the physics of economics somehow do not apply to us because of the flag we fly or the past victories we have achieved. But the universe does not grant exceptions to those who mismanage their resources and overextend their reach. And right now, we are seeing a massive disconnect between the official narrative being sold on the evening news and the cold, hard facts of our declining institutional capacity. You have to understand that a system does not fall because it is attacked from the outside nearly as often as it falls because it has become too heavy to support its own structural requirements. When we look at the transition from stage one to stage two of this decline, we are looking at the shift from a growth mindset to a survival mindset where the elites stop trying to build a better future and start trying to manage a controlled descent while extracting as much value as possible for themselves. The expansion that once defined the strength of the system has turned into a parasite that drains the host of its vital energy every single day. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. We see this in the way we maintain hundreds of military bases across the globe and intervene in conflicts that have no direct bearing on the actual security of our borders or the prosperity of our citizens. It is a prideful expansion fueled by the memory of a power that no longer exists in the same way. And it forces us to spend money we do not have to solve problems we cannot fix. This is the hallmark of stage one, where the system is still growing in size, but it is actually shrinking in terms of its efficiency and its return on investment. Every dollar spent on maintaining an overextended empire is a dollar that is not being used to reinforce the internal foundations of the society. And eventually, the infrastructure begins to crumble, and the education systems fail, and the middle class is hollowed out to pay for the global ambitions of a ruling class that is completely out of touch with reality. As we move into stage two, the financial engineering becomes the only thing keeping the lights on because the actual productivity of the nation has been outsourced or regulated into the ground. When a superpower can no longer lead through innovation and production, it turns to the printing press and the manipulation of interest rates to create a false sense of prosperity. This is a dangerous game because it relies entirely on the continued faith of the global market in a currency that is backed by nothing but a fading reputation and a massive military. But debt is a jealous master, and it eventually demands a level of service that consumes the entire budget of the nation, leaving nothing left for the actual needs of the people. We are seeing a world where the financial sector has become the tail that wags the dog, and the health of the stock market is prioritized over the health of the actual economy where real people work and live. This creates a massive bubble of perception that is completely untethered from the physical reality of our declining capacity. And when that bubble inevitably bursts, the impact will be far more devastating because we have no real industry left to catch us. You have to realize that complexity is not a sign of sophistication, but a sign of decay when it reaches the levels we are seeing in stage three. A healthy system is transparent and adaptable, but a dying system is opaque and rigid because it has layers upon layers of bureaucracy designed to protect the institutions from accountability. We have created a world where it takes decades to build a bridge, but seconds to authorize $1 billion bailout for a failing bank. And this inversion of priorities is a clear indicator that the system is no longer functioning for the benefit of the governed. The bureaucracy grows because the leaders no longer trust the people, and the people no longer trust the leaders. So every interaction must be monitored and regulated and documented. until the sheer friction of existing in the society becomes unbearable. This is how a superpower dies, not with a bang, but with a mountain of paperwork that prevents anyone from taking the decisive action necessary to save the ship before it hits the iceberg. Stage 4 is where the emotional and social fabric of the country begins to tear. And this is perhaps the most painful part of the process to witness. We are seeing the rise of a culture of resentment where different groups are pitted against each other to distract from the fact that the people at the top are looting the burning building. When a superpower can no longer provide a rising standard of living for its citizens, it turns to identity politics and social engineering to keep the population divided and conquered. Trust is the invisible currency that makes a society work. And once that trust is gone, you cannot just print more of it. We see the erosion of common values and the loss of a shared sense of purpose, which means that when the system faces a real external threat, there is no internal unity to meet the challenge. People begin to see their neighbors as enemies and the state as an occupying force. And once you reach that level of internal fracture, the collapse is no longer a matter of if, but a matter of when. We are standing in the shadow of stage 5 right now, where the global community is starting to walk away from the old order because they can see the writing on the wall. The dominance of the reserve currency is being challenged not because a better alternative exists, but because the current system has become too weaponized and too unpredictable to be trusted. Other nations are watching our internal chaos and our mounting debt, and they are making the rational decision to protect themselves by building their own networks and their own trade blocks. This is a massive shift in the global balance of power that happens once in a century. And if you are not prepared for a world where the superpower is no longer the undisputed leader, you're going to be crushed by the transition. The influence we once had through diplomacy and economic strength is being replaced by threats and sanctions, which is on the desperate language of a power that knows its soft power has evaporated. In stage 6, the system enters a period of extreme brittleness where every single intervention creates two new problems for every one it tries to solve. The leaders become obsessed with stability at all costs, which means they stifle the very creative destruction that is necessary for a society to evolve and renew itself. They keep zombie companies alive and they protect failing institutions because they are afraid that letting them fail will trigger the final collapse. But all they are doing is making the eventual failure much larger and much more violent. This is the stage of permanent crisis where the public is kept in a state of constant fear and anxiety to justify the increasing centralization of power and the suspension of traditional liberties. The system becomes a prison of its own making, and the people within it become increasingly desperate for any kind of change, even if that change is destructive. The final stage is the collapse itself, and it usually happens in a way that no one predicted, even though it was inevitable in hindsight. It might be a sudden loss of confidence in the currency or a military defeat that reveals the emptiness of the superpower's threats, or a domestic uprising that the security forces can no longer contain. Whatever the trigger, the result is a rapid disintegration of the old structures and a period of intense chaos as the world tries to find a new equilibrium. This is why I tell you to pay attention now, because once we hit stage 7, there is no time left to move your assets or secure your family or find a new way of living. The people who thrive in the aftermath of a superpower's decline are the ones who saw it coming during stage 4 and 5 and took the steps to become independent of the failing system before it dragged them down with it. You need to understand that the goal of this discussion is not to make you feel hopeless, but to give you the clarity you need to act with purpose in a world that is losing its mind. We are moving toward a period of massive reorganization where the old hierarchies will be dismantled and new centers of power will emerge based on real value and real production rather than financial manipulation and empty rhetoric. This is why I am so adamant about you taking control of your own financial destiny and learning the skills that will matter in the new economy. The world of the future will not care about your degree or your corporate title. It will care about your ability to solve problems and protect your wealth in a volatile environment. When we transition from stage 5 into stage 6, the mask of authority finally slips, and the system reveals that it is no longer governed by laws or principles, but by the raw desperation for self preservation. You can see the landscape of our current institutions shifting into a frantic desire to control the narrative because the reality of the situation is becoming impossible to manage through traditional means. We are seeing a massive increase in the centralization of authority, where the government and the largest corporations merge into a single entity designed to suppress dissent and maintain the status quo at any cost to the individual. This is what happens when a superpower realizes that its moral authority has vanished, and it must now rely on pure coercion to keep the gears turning. You are witnessing the birth of an era where every aspect of your life is being scrutinized and monitored, not for your safety, but to ensure that you do not become a variable that the system cannot predict or control. This level of oversight is a clear admission of weakness because a strong and confident society does not need to treat its own citizens like potential threats to be managed through algorithms and surveillance. As the financial rot deepens, the internal order cycle moves into a phase where the struggle over the making and taking of wealth becomes the primary driver of human behavior. In this environment, productivity declines as the population becomes disillusioned and the ruling class turns to heavy taxation and capital flight restrictions to keep the wealth within their reach. This is a self reinforcing, hollowing out process that shrinks the economic pie while increasing the intensity of the fight over the remaining crumbs. We see the emergence of an elitist caste that maintains access to privileges based on status rather than merit, which further alienates the productive members of society. When the gap between the rich and the poor reaches a breaking point and the middle class is effectively liquidated, the social friction generates a heat that eventually ignites in the form of internal revolutions or civil unrest. This is the classic toxic mix of bad financial health and deep social differences that Ray Dalio describes as the precursor to a total change in the world order. The fragmentation of the global order means that the safety nets we have relied on for generations are beginning to fray, and the guarantees of the state are becoming increasingly worthless as the currency loses its purchasing power. We are entering a period where the individual must become their own sovereign entity because the collective structures are becoming too unstable to provide any real security. This is why I am constantly pushing you to diversify your interests and to stop keeping all of your eggs in the basket of the traditional financial system. When the collapse of stage 7 arrives, the people who are still waiting for a government bailout or a corporate pension will be the ones who suffer the most because those institutions will be focused entirely on saving themselves. You have to be proactive in your approach to wealth and security, which means moving away from paper promises and toward hard assets and decentralized systems that do not require the permission of a failing bureaucracy to function. The shift toward a multipolar world is not a theory, but a physical reality that is manifesting in every trade deal and every international summit that happens outside of the traditional Western power centers. One of the most telling signs of stage 6 is the way the leadership treats the currency. Throughout history, from the Dutch guilder to the British pound, every reserve currency has followed the same path of devaluation through excessive money printing to fund wars and internal welfare. When the Bank of Amsterdam began funding the Dutch East India Company with freshly printed guilders without an equivalent increase in precious metals, they were effectively signing the death warrant of their empire. Today, we see a similar pattern with central banks creating money at will to service a debt that can never be repaid. This leads to a massive transfer of wealth from the savers to the debtors and a loss of confidence among international holders who begin to divest their reserves into stronger alternatives. Once the trust in the currency is gone, the superpower loses its ability to influence global economic conditions, and the cost of maintaining its military and administrative reach becomes unsustainable. The psychological impact of this decline cannot be overstated because we are seeing a rise in nihilism and despair among the youth who can feel that the future they were promised has been sold out from under them. When the path to home ownership and a stable family life is blocked by a wall of inflation and debt, people begin to lose interest in the success of the society and start looking for ways to opt out entirely. This is, yes, is the heart of the movement toward men walking away, because the social contract has been fundamentally broken, and the rewards for participation no longer outweigh the cost of compliance. If the system expects you to work harder for less while sacrificing your values and your autonomy, it is only rational to start looking for the exit. We are seeing a massive reorganization of human capital where the most talented and capable individuals are leaving the traditional workforce to build their own independent lives. And this brain drain is the final nail in the coffin for any superpower. Without the participation of its best and brightest, the system becomes a hollow shell inhabited by bureaucrats and those who are too afraid to survive on their own. Like, you have to understand that the reorganization phase that follows the collapse is not necessarily the end of the world, but it is the end of the world as we have known it. History shows that power does not just vanish, it moves and it transforms into something new that reflects the needs of the current era. The new centers of power will be those that prioritize local resilience and technological independence over global integration and centralized control. We are moving toward a world of city states and regional alliances where the ability to produce your own energy and your own food and your own security will be the ultimate measure of status. The global supply chains that made the superpower era possible are becoming too fragile to rely on. And we are going to see a return to domestic manufacturing and localized economies out of sheer necessity. This is actually an opportunity for those who are prepared because it allows for a level of freedom and creativity that was impossible under the stifling weight of the old empire. But to get to that new world, you have to survive the transition, which is going to be the most volatile period in modern history. The death throes of a superpower are loud and violent, and the system will try to drag everything down with it as it sinks into the abyss of its own making. This is why you must be mentally and physically prepared to handle a period of prolonged instability where the rules of the game change every single week. You cannot afford to be a passive consumer of information anymore. You have to be an active participant in your own survival strategy. Every decision you make, from how you spend your time to where you keep your capital, should be viewed through the lens of these 7 stages of decline. If you are still playing the game like it is 1995 or even 2015, you are going to be blindsided by the speed at which the final stages move once the momentum takes over. The concept of a superpower is based on the idea that one central authority can dictate the terms of existence for the rest of the world. But that idea is being proven false by the complexity of the 21st century. No single nation can manage the sheer volume of information and the speed of technological change that we are currently experiencing. The system is trying to use 20th century tools to solve 21st century problems, and it is failing at every turn. This creates a vacuum of leadership that is being filled by non state actors and decentralized networks that can move faster and adapt more easily than a massive government bureaucracy. The future belongs to the agile and the independent, not the large and the stagnant. And the sooner you align yourself with that reality, the better your chances of thriving in the aftermath of the collapse. When we analyze the internal mechanics of a superpower entering its final stages of dominance, we have to look closely at the erosion of the meritocracy that built the foundation of its strength. In the early stages of an empire, the most capable individuals are elevated to positions of authority because the survival of the collective depends on competence and results. However, as we slide into stage 6, the selection criteria for leadership shift from capability to loyalty and adherence to the institutional narrative. This creates a feedback loop of failure where the people in charge are fundamentally incapable of diagnosing the problems they face because their entire worldview is based on protecting the bureaucracy that granted them their status. This is why you see such a consistent pattern of tone deaf responses from leadership during a crisis. They are literally living in a different reality than the people who are dealing with the physical consequences of their mismanagement. When the elite of a nation lose their connection to the ground level reality of their citizens, the collapse of that nation is no longer a matter of if, but a matter of how fast the descent will accelerate. The financial transition from a global leader to a regional power is often accompanied by a desperate attempt to weaponize the existing financial infrastructure to maintain control. We see this in the increasing use of sanctions, the freezing of sovereign assets, and the monitoring of private transactions under the guise of security. While these measures might work in the short term to punish rivals, they actually accelerate the long term decline by showing the rest of the world that the superpower system is no longer a neutral platform for trade. Every time a financial system is used as a weapon, it provides a massive incentive for other nations to build their own alternative systems that are beyond the reach of the crumbling empire. This is how the fragmentation of the world order begins, not with a sudden war, but with a series of small, rational decisions made by global actors to protect themselves from an increasingly erratic and desperate central authority. You need to be watching these shifts in global trade routes and settlement currencies because they are the real time scoreboard of the superpowers' receding influence. In the social sphere, the decline is marked by a retreat into tribalism as the common identity that once united the population dissolves under the pressure of economic hardship. When there is no longer a growing pie to share, people naturally revert to smaller, more cohesive groups to protect their specific interests. This internal bickering is exactly what the ruling class wants because it prevents the population from focusing on the systemic failures at the top. But this strategy is a double edged sword. While it may delay a unified revolution, it also destroys the internal stability required to project power abroad. A nation that is at war with itself cannot lead the world. And eventually, the cost of maintaining internal order exceeds the capacity of the state to collect taxes. This leads to a degradation of public services, an increase in lawlessness, and a general sense of decay that permeates the everyday life of the citizen. The infrastructure stops being maintained. The legal system becomes a tool for political retribution, and the average person begins to feel like a stranger in their own land. This brings us to the importance of psychological resilience and the ability to find meaning outside of the traditional societal metrics. If you tie your sense of worth and security to the stability of a failing superpower, you are setting yourself up for a psychological collapse alongside the institutional one. The movement of men walking away is not just about opting out of a broken dating market or a biased legal system. It is about reclaiming the primary authority over one's own life. It is about recognizing that the grand narrative being sold to you is a trap designed to keep you productive for a machine that does not care about your well being. By focusing on your own physical health, your own skill set, and your own private community, you are building a fortress that can survive the storms of stage 7. You have to stop asking for permission to be successful and start creating the conditions for your own independence, regardless of what the central government is doing. The reorganization that happens after a superpower falls is often characterized by a return to hard truths and tangible value. In the peak of an empire, the economy is dominated by services, speculation, and administrative roles that produce nothing of physical substance. But when the currency fails and the supply lines break, the world suddenly remembers that food, energy, and defense are the only things that truly matter. We are going to see a massive shift back to the physical world where people who can build, fix, and grow things will be the new elite. The digital economy will not disappear, but it will be anchored to real world utility rather than the pursuit of virtual likes or speculative bubbles. This is why I tell you to invest in your own education and your own equipment now while the old currency still has some value. A garage full of tools and a head full of knowledge will be worth more than $1 million in a bank account that you cannot access or that has been devalued to zero. The role of technology in this decline is also a major factor that differentiates our current era from the falls of previous empires. In the past, information moved slowly and it could be controlled by a centralized authority. Today, the speed of information makes it impossible for the state to keep the lid on its own failures indefinitely. The truth leaks out through decentralized channels, and the official propaganda is debunked in real time by people with nothing more than a smartphone and an internet connection. This has created a crisis of legitimacy that no previous superpower had to deal with. The state reacts by trying to censor the internet and regulate speech, but this only confirms the public's suspicions that the leadership has something to hide. Technology has given the individual a level of power that was previously reserved for kings, and while the state will try to use that same technology for surveillance, the inherent nature of the internet is to route around damage and censorship. As we move deeper into stage 6, the desperation of the leadership will manifest in more aggressive foreign policies as they try to find an external enemy to blame for the internal decline. This is the most dangerous phase for global peace because a superpower with a failing economy and a fracturing social base often sees war as the only way to restore national unity and justify emergency measures. You must be wary of the drums of war and the rhetoric of patriotism that is used to distract from the fact that the nation's wealth has been squandered. The true patriot is the one who sees the decline for what it is and works to preserve the core values of the society in spite of the government's failures. We are entering a time where your loyalty must be to the truth and to your own survival rather than to a flag that is being used as a shroud for a dying system. The fragmentation of the United States or any modern superpower will likely not look like a clean break or a formal civil war, but rather a slow Brazilification, where different regions and neighborhoods have vastly different qualities of life and legal standards. You will have pockets of extreme wealth and security surrounded by vast areas of neglect and dysfunction. This creates a geography of risk that you need to navigate with extreme care. Where you choose to live and who you choose to associate with will be the most important decisions you make in the coming decade. You want to be in a place where the local community is self sufficient and where the local authorities are more concerned with protecting their citizens than with enforcing the dictates of a failing central capital. The future is local, and the sooner you build your local network, the better prepared you will be for the eventual transition to stage 7. In the final hours of a superpower, the most valuable asset isn't gold or land, but the ability to adapt and the willingness to see the world as it actually is, rather than how we wish it would be. Most people will spend the rest of their lives trying to get back to a normal that no longer exists because they cannot accept that the cycle has moved on. They will wait for a political savior who will never come, or a policy change that will never work, while the window of opportunity to secure their own future slowly closes. You have the advantage of knowing the stages and understanding the momentum of history. Use this time to harden your life, to build your skills, and to walk away from the dependencies that keep you tethered to a sinking ship. The reorganization that follows will be a time of great struggle, but it will also be a time of incredible freedom for those who are not afraid to stand on their own 2 feet and face the new world with eyes wide open. To truly grasp the gravity of our situation, we must look at the historical mirror of the Roman denarius and the British pound, which both followed the exact same trajectory of debasement and dilution that we see today. In its early days, the denarius was a high purity silver coin, the literal bedrock of Roman trade and the symbol of its unrivaled power. But as the empire reached the limits of its expansion and the costs of maintaining a global military presence began to outpace its actual production, the leadership resorted to the oldest trick in the book. They started shaving the silver content of the coins. By the time of the final collapse, what was once a silver coin had become a copper slug with a thin silver wash that wore off in a matter of weeks. This was not just a change in metallurgy, it was a total destruction of trust. When the shopkeepers in the provinces realized the money was a lie, they stopped accepting it for goods, and the once mighty Roman logistics machine ground to a halt. We saw this again with the British Empire in the mid 20th century. After two world wars that drained the British treasury, the pound could no longer hold its position as the world's reserve currency. The shift didn't happen overnight, but it was irreversible. The British leadership tried to maintain the illusion of power by fixing exchange rates and imposing capital controls, but the market eventually spoke the truth. By the 1950s, the world had moved on to the dollar, and the British were forced to manage a painful contraction that saw their global influence evaporate and their domestic standard of living stagnate for decades. The lesson here is that once the currency is compromised to pay for the sins of the past, the empire is on a countdown that no amount of political rhetoric can stop. This leads us into the heart of stage 6, where the system becomes so brittle that it can no longer absorb even minor shocks. We are currently seeing the emergence of a zombie economy where interest rates are manipulated to keep failing institutions on life support. In a healthy system, bad companies are allowed to fail so that resources can flow to more efficient ones. But in a declining superpower, the leaders are too terrified of a systemic collapse to let anything fail. This creates a mountain of dead wood that prevents any real growth and leaves the entire structure vulnerable to a single spark. Whether that spark is a geopolitical conflict, a bank run, or a sudden loss of confidence in the bond market, the result will be a cascade of failures that the central authorities will be powerless to stop because they have already used all their ammunition just to keep the status quo alive. During this phase, you will notice a desperate move toward digital surveillance and the weaponization of the financial system against the citizenry. When the carrot of prosperity is gone, the state has only the stick of coercion. We see this in the push for central bank digital currencies and the increasing surveillance of private transactions. The goal is to create a closed loop system where your ability to spend, save, and move is entirely dependent on your compliance with the narrative. This is the ultimate expression of the complexity trap of stage 3, where the bureaucracy becomes so intrusive that it stifles the very lifeblood of the nation. It is a simulated order that masks a fundamental chaos underneath. But there is a silver lining for the individual who is willing to see the truth. As the central authority weakens, the power begins to redistribute toward the edges. We are entering an era of radical decentralization, where those who have built their own independent networks of trade, communication, and security will be the ones to define the next chapter of history. This is why I am so vocal about the men walking away movement. It is a recognition that the old rewards for playing by the rules are gone, and the only path to a meaningful life is to build your own rules. By withdrawing your participation from a system that is designed to consume you, you are not just surviving, you are reclaiming your sovereignty as a man and a citizen. The reorganization that follows the collapse of Stage 7 will be a time of intense competition between new regional centers of power. We are already seeing the early signs of this in the way states and cities are beginning to ignore federal mandates and chart their own courses. This Brazilification of the superpower means that your quality of life will depend more on your local community than on the national government. You want to be in a place where people are productive, where the local leadership is pragmatic, and where there is a shared sense of responsibility. The globalist dream of a seamless, borderless world is dying, and in its place, we are seeing the return of the tribe and the city state. To navigate this, you must develop a multidimensional security strategy. It's not enough to just have some money put away. You need to have physical security, digital privacy, and a network of trusted individuals who can help each other when the formal systems fail. This is what it means to be a high value man in the 21st century. It's not about the car you drive or the clothes you wear. It's about your utility and your resilience. Can you defend yourself? Can you fix a machine? Do you understand how to navigate the decentralized web? These are the skills that will matter when the administrative layers of the superpower finally crumble away. We also have to discuss the role of bread and circuses in the modern era. Just as the Roman emperors used the Colosseum to distract a restless and hungry populace, modern leadership uses the 24-hour news cycle and the endless stream of digital entertainment to keep you from noticing the decay. They want you focused on the latest controversy or the newest gadget so that you don't look at the debt clock or the crumbling infrastructure. But entertainment doesn't put food on the table, and it won't protect your savings when the currency hits its terminal decline. You have to turn off the noise and focus on the signals that actually matter for your long term survival. When we talk about the negative aspects of this collapse, we have to look past the abstract numbers and focus on the cold reality of what happens when the pipes stop working, both literally and metaphorically. The most immediate impact of entering Stage 7 is the rapid degradation of the public commons. In a superpower, you are used to the idea that when you turn on the faucet, water comes out, and when you call for help, someone arrives. But as the system fractures, these basic assumptions evaporate. We see the rise of what I call institutional abandonment, where the state no longer has the resources or the political will to maintain the infrastructure in non essential areas. This means bridges that aren't repaired, power grids that become increasingly unreliable, and a legal system that only functions for those who can pay for private arbitration. You have to face the fact that the safety net you were told would always be there is being dismantled in real time to fund the survival of the elite at the top. The financial fallout is equally brutal because it hits the middle class with a double sided blade. The destruction of savings through inflation and the loss of income through institutional failure. We saw this during the collapse of the Soviet Union, where people who had worked for 40 years saw their entire life savings become worth less than a loaf of bread in a matter of weeks. This isn't just an economic adjustment, it is a psychological trauma that breaks the spirit of a population. When the currency fails, the social contract is null and void. People who were once law abiding citizens are forced into the black market just to feed their families, and the rules of the old world become a joke. You have to be ready for a world where legal and illegal are replaced by possible and impossible. So, how do you survive this? The first step is to shift your mindset from dependency to resiliency. If your survival depends on a global supply chain or a government check, you are a hostage to the collapse. You need to start building what I call a personal sovereignty protocol. This means securing your basic needs outside of the centralized system. Do you have a way to filter water? Do you have a secondary power source, even if it is just a few solar panels to keep a radio and a flashlight running? Do you have a store of subsistence calories or to grains, beans, and canned goods that can get you through a 3-month disruption? Most people think prepping is about some movie style apocalypse, but the reality of collapse is much more boring and much more dangerous. It is just things not working when you need them to. You also have to address the skills gap that makes the modern man so vulnerable. We have become a society of specialists who know a lot about very little. But in a stage 7 reorganization, the generalist is king. You need to know the basics of first aid, mechanical repair, and local food production. If you cannot fix a leak or grow a potato, you are going to be at the mercy of whoever can. This is the ultimate angry guy wake up call. The system has domesticated you to be a consumer, but the future requires you to be a producer. Every skill you learn now is a hedge against the institutional failure of the future. Start by learning how to maintain your own equipment and how to secure your immediate surroundings. Finally, you must build your parallel community. Survival is a team sport, and the lone wolf is the first one to go when the environment turns hostile. You need to identify a small group of trusted individuals, family, neighbors, or close friends who have complementary skills and a shared commitment to mutual aid. This is the foundation of the MWA philosophy, walking away from the broken macro system to build a functional microsystem. When the central authority can no longer provide security, your neighbors become your police force. When the supermarkets are empty, your local trade network becomes your economy. It's not about hiding in a bunker. It is about building a new society in the shell of the old one. The world on the other side of a stage 7 collapse is not a wasteland, but it is a world that has become much smaller, much more local, and significantly more demanding of your personal character. When the dust settles from the fragmentation of a superpower, the grand illusions of global governance and effortless convenience are replaced by the hard realities of local accountability. You have to imagine a landscape where the federal government in a distant capital has about as much influence over your daily life as a historical footnote. In this new reality, power flows to those who can actually provide the essentials: security, energy, and a medium of exchange that people actually trust. The vast, bloated bureaucracies will have evaporated because there is no longer a functional tax base to support their parasitic existence. This means that the managerial class that has dominated our society for the last century, the people who move papers and attend meetings but produce nothing, will find themselves entirely obsolete. The social hierarchy will invert, and the man who can maintain a solar array, treat a wound, or secure a perimeter will be the new foundation of the community. Preparing for this world requires a total purge of the consumer mindset that has been programmed into you since birth. Most people are waiting for a savior or a return to the status quo, but the survivor is already building the parallel structures that will replace the old ones. The first pillar of your preparation must be your physical and mental hardening. You cannot navigate a collapsing system if you are physically soft and mentally fragile. You need to be in the best shape of your life, not for aesthetics, but for utility. Can you carry your own gear? Can you work a full day in the sun? Can you handle extreme stress without a panic attack? If the answer is no, then you are a liability to yourself and everyone you care about. The mental game is even more critical because you have to accept that the comforts you once took for granted, overnight shipping, reliable internet, and a predictable legal system, are privileges of a peak empire that are now gone. You must develop the stoic grit to see these losses as opportunities for a more authentic and self reliant life. The second pillar is the total decentralization of your assets and your dependencies. If your entire life is stored on a centralized server or in a traditional bank account, you are effectively a ghost waiting to be deleted. You must move toward a model of distributed wealth, which includes hard assets like tools, precious metals, and land, but also includes digital assets that are beyond the reach of a failing state. This is why understanding the mechanics of decentralized finance is not a hobby. It is a survival skill. You need to have a way to move value that does not require the permission of a bank teller or a government bureaucrat. But beyond financial capital, you need social capital. In the reorganization phase, your reputation within your local tribe is the only currency that matters. Are you a man of your word? Do you have skills that benefit the collective? Can you be trusted in a crisis? These are the questions that will determine your status in the post collapse world. The third pillar is the mastery of the gray zone of existence. This means learning to operate in the spaces where the old laws no longer apply, but the new order hasn't fully formed. You need to understand how to maintain your privacy in a world of increasing surveillance and how to navigate the black and gray markets that inevitably arise when the formal economy dies. This is about more than just buying and selling. It is about building a shadow infrastructure that allows you and your community to thrive while the state is in its death throes. This is the ultimate expression of walking away. You aren't just leaving the system, you are replacing it with something more resilient and more human. The world after the collapse will be a world of micro sovereignties, where the quality of your life is directly proportional to the quality of the people you have surrounded yourself with. As we look toward this future, the goal is not just to survive, but to be the architects of the reorganization. When the old systems fail, there is a vacuum of leadership, and if the men of character and competence do not step up, that vacuum will be filled by the same kind of tyrants who caused the collapse in the first place. By building your own resilience, your own community, and your own independent wealth now, you are positioning yourself to be a leader in the world that follows. This is the true meaning of the angry guy philosophy. We are angry because the system is broken, but we are productive because we are the ones who will build what comes next. The path is difficult and the stakes are higher than they have ever been, but the reward is a life of true freedom and sovereignty that no superpower could ever provide. What did you think about the vision of a decentralized, localized future? And are you more afraid of the chaos or excited by the potential for true independence? I want to hear your thoughts on how we can start building these parallel communities today. So leave a comment and share your strategy with the rest of us. We are all in this transition together, and the more we can learn from each other's preparations, the better our chances of coming out on the other side, stronger than we went in. Don't wait for the final collapse to start moving. The window for action is closing, and the men who wait for permission will be the ones who lose everything. Like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe, and if you like the video, share the video, and just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.